10%. And I think as the news continues to get good on earnings, that the stocks could challenge their old highs again. But I think most of the gain, most of the good relative performance of this stock group in this business cycle has already taken place. They could recover some, but I think most of the money, most of the easy money has been made in the auto stocks in this cycle.
What are the ratings on the big three?
My favorite auto stock continues to be Chrysler. I think that company is continuing to gain market share as a result of a very aggressive development of new products.
And GM and Ford, you just have holds on?
I think that my second choice would be Ford. My third choice, really basically a hold, would be General Motors. Chrysler is the one that I favor at this point.
Okay. David Healy of S.G. Warburg, thanks very much for being with us.
Still ahead, a new government report paints a bleak picture of the workplace of the future and says Depression-era laws need to be updated to keep up with changing times.
Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation today asked the FCC to review the 1985 purchase of 6 television stations by its Fox unit. News Corporation says it made the request because of recent challenges to its ownership structure. But sources tell Reuters the FCC is already studying whether the deal violated federal foreign ownership laws. Meanwhile, CBS, which recently lost 8 affiliates to Fox, is promising to maintain a strong network of stations by focusing on programming. CBS stock today rose 7 points to close at $273 a share.
Allied Signal said today it's won a contract worth more than $2 billion to build auxiliary power units for Boeing's new 737X aircraft. The units provide power for starting engines and for air conditioning. Boeing plans to build about 2,000 of the planes over the next 20 years. Allied Signal stock rose 5/8 on the news to 35 3/8. Boeing gained 1 1/8 to end at 47 7/8.
Well, we had a kind of a strange day on Wall Street today. Everybody's sitting around waiting for tomorrow's jobless report for the month of May. And let's review. We see down 1.84. We were up 6-7 points for a good part of the mid-session. So we had a little late flop in the blue chips, but the advanced decline ratio is still positive. 12 stocks up for every 8 lower. 400 difference exactly. 77 new highs for the years against 61 new lows. That's a pleasant surprise. Walmart topped the active list on 6.3 million shares, losing 1/8 of a point. Then Kmart up 1/2 a point. Philip Morris gained 1/4, and so did Lehman Brothers Holdings, which was spun off this past Tuesday by American Express. Merck, 5th in volume, gained 1/4 of a point. IBM down 1.5 points after Dean Witter downgraded the stock from an accumulate rating to neutral, basically on a price basis because IBM has had a little run up recently. Telmex showed no change. The Mexican market down about 7 points on the Bolsa Index today. WMX Technology up another 1/8. Yesterday it gained 1 1/8 on a Merrill Lynch upgrade. U.S. Surgical, which was a big gainer yesterday, rising 2 5/8 on takeover rumors, namely Ciba Geigy, the Swiss firm, was supposed to make a bid, and today Ciba Geigy said it has no buyout planned for U.S. Surgical. AirTouch was up 1/8 of a point, 10th in volume. Abbott Laboratories gained 5/8 of a point after Payne Weber added the stock to its focus list. Conagra gained 1/4. Late today, the Dane Bosworth brokerage upgraded the stock from hold to buy and increased earnings estimates for the 4th quarter from 48 to 52 cents. Fluor doing well, up 2 full points. Higher 2nd quarter earnings released today. 58 cents up from last year's 51 cents on a 4% jump in revenues. And Dean Witter repeated an accumulate recommendation on Fluor stock. Ford down 1 1/8 in a rather soft auto group. JCPenney dropped 2 full points. Its May same-store sales up only 5% and total sales up only 6.8%. Mylan Laboratories did well, up 1.5 points. Helped along by positive comments from an analyst at Kidder Peabody who sees strong 1st quarter earnings. McDermott International up 3 7/8 and Offshore Pipelines up 2 5/8, a direct connection between those two big gains. The companies have agreed to merge their worldwide marine construction businesses into a new jointly owned company. Gottschalk's, the California retail chain, gained 1 1/4. The company reported that its May same-store sales were up 3.7%. English China Clays up 1 7/8. Yesterday, the company completed the spin-off of its Camas division, that's C-A-M-A-S division. Horace Mann Educators up 1 3/8. Positive comments about it on the Herd on the Street column in today's Wall Street Journal. Some pros think there'll be a takeover bid, maybe as much as 28 to 30% above the present market price. Hillenbrand Industries, one of the few big percentage losers, down 2 5/8. The company is predicting a decline in second quarter earnings due to an order slowdown at its healthcare unit, and Kidder Peabody downgraded the stock a notch. NASDAQ trading nearly a 4-point gain in the index, volume down to 297.8 million shares, just a touch lower than yesterday. 1,749 issues higher, 1,350 lower. Oracle System topped the active list, moving up 2 1/4 after the Alex Brown brokerage repeated a strong buy recommendation. Intel down a small fraction. 3Com fell 3.5 points. Microsoft down 3/4 point. And Newbridge Network, after dropping 3 3/8 yesterday, down another 3 1/4. The company attributes the weakness to a misunderstanding by analysts regarding the FCC ordering NYNEX to modify its supplier agreement with the company. Newbridge says it won't lose any business over that. Lotus Development was down a point. Apple Computer fell 7/8. IDB Communications was tumbled over 7 points yesterday when its auditor resigned, or rebounding a bit, 1 3/16. Synoptics fell 2 5/8, and McCaw Cellular fell 5/8. Coal Management Services up 2 3/4. The company received a $15 a share buyout bid from its chairman, along with an investment firm. Moscom dropping 1 5/8. Sage Ruddy Brokerage cut earnings estimates there, and Sundance Homes down 1 point. The company's chief financial officer and vice president, Frank Schwab, has resigned. The American Exchange Index up 0.65, volume up about 1.4 million shares from yesterday, 309 up, 279 down. Exploration Company of Louisiana topped the active list again, no change there. Bomar Instrument up 7/16, the best percentage gainer of the day, but the company had no news to account for it. And NTN Communications gained 3/4. The story here, the company will publish Avery Publishing Group's book entitled So You Think You're Good at Trivia sometime this fall. And that is our Wall Street wrap-up. Cassie.
A special commission appointed by President Clinton issued a report today warning that the United States is splitting into a two-tier society of high and low-wage workers. Headed by former Labor Secretary John Dunlap, the commission spent the last year examining labor management relations. Its findings could spark the first major rewrite of the nation's labor laws in decades. Darren Gersh reports.
The commission report describes a workplace that often fails to work for many Americans. It warns that productivity is growing too slowly, lawsuits are rising too quickly, and according to the commission, the wage gap between permanent employees and low-skilled part-timers is widening.
The United States, among industrialized nations, has the most unequal distribution of earnings of any industrialized nation. Now, that can't go on forever. That, to me, spells a breakdown somewhere along the line.
The commission did point out ways to reverse that trend, and it concluded that greater labor management cooperation does help increase productivity. And commission surveys found 50 million American workers are eager for a chance to participate in decision-making at work. But the commission found management resistance to unions often made such cooperation more difficult. And it found that workers who try to form unions are often fired. Unions seized on those conclusions, calling for a sweeping rewrite of the nation's labor laws.
To arrest the trend toward a two-tier society, we must assure working men and women of a meaningful opportunity to form unions and to bargain collectively with their employer.
But business groups say the commission report exaggerates a relatively small number of violations.
The labor unions, of course, have seized on this and made it out to be much larger than it is in objective fact.
More significant, business groups say, is the commission's emphasis on excessive regulation and litigation. Employees are now suing employers at a rate 5 times greater than that of 20 years ago. The commission stressed the need to streamline regulation and find new ways to settle disputes out of court.
Most of what the government does is either out of date or is counterproductive. The commission has simply said this is a big problem. It needs to be addressed, and I think opens the door to a completely different discussion of how to improve workplace performance.
The commission is not expected to release specific recommendations until after the November elections, pushing any debate about an overhaul of the nation's labor laws into 1995. Darren Gersh, NBR, Washington.
Coming up, the NBR Mutual Fund reports. And in tonight's Money File, Eric Schurenberg looks at municipal bonds.
It should be clear soon whether plans to relaunch Eastern Airlines will fly. Martin Chagru, the court-appointed trustee for Eastern, told reporters today that he should know within a month if the $100 million in financing needed for the project will be available. If all goes as planned, the new Eastern will take off in October.
Major catastrophes early this year have put the insurance industry on alert and in the red. Losses by property casualty insurers topped $1 billion in the first quarter, according to the Insurance Information Institute. Earnings rose more than $4 billion during the same period a year ago. The losses are blamed, of course, on massive claims from the California earthquake and severe winter storms.
Top growth and income funds of the last year are listed tonight on NBR's Mutual Fund report using data from Morningstar. The #1 performer among growth funds for the trailing 12 months is the Fairmount Fund. This fund has a long time overweighting in financial related stocks that helped both in '93 and held up decently in early '94. And the #1 growth and income fund for the last year is Babson Value. Management of this fund uses a chartist approach and then considers company fundamentals. And that's our mutual fund report for tonight. Paul?
In tonight's Money File, Eric Schurenberg, senior editor at Money Magazine, suggests municipal bonds are still a good tax shelter.
For anyone who owns municipal bonds or municipal bond funds, this has been a humbling year. There is something worse than paying taxes on your income, it turns out. That's losing great chunks of your principal in a bond market rout. Prices of typical long-term munis are off 14% from their 12-month highs, according to the Bond Buyer Index. What happens now? Well, it all depends on whether the inflation scare is over. It certainly seems that the Federal Reserve means to resist inflation. After all, it was the Fed's interest rate hike in February, designed to head inflation off at the pass, that really started the bond market's misery. The problem is there's no guarantee that the Fed will succeed. A few unexpectedly strong economic numbers, and the stampede might pick up right where it left off. But if you need to invest for income, and you're willing to take a chance, here's some food for thought. Municipal bonds remain the one pure tax shelter in a year when a lot of taxpayers are realizing that they just paid the IRS more than ever in their lives. If you're in the 31% tax bracket, you'd have to earn more than 9% on a taxable bond to pocket as much after taxes as you would on a AAA muni. At the same time, the panic of the past few months has created some interesting bargains. You can now pick up some high-quality closed-end muni funds for well below the value of their assets. Buy a closed-end fund at a 10% discount, for example, and you get $1 worth of bonds for 90 cents. Well, that kind of price gives you a little extra cushion, just in case you're a tad early getting back into the market. I'm Eric Schurenberg.
That's it for this edition of NBR for Thursday, June 2nd. I'm Cassie Slyford in New York. Thank you for being with us. See you tomorrow, Paul.
Good night, Cassie. I'm Paul Kangas in Miami, wishing all of you the best of goodbyes.
NBR is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher, which provides NBR with news, market data, and communication services worldwide, and is made possible by A.G. Edwards, providing personalized financial services and investment advice to individuals and businesses. A.G. Edwards, a century-old tradition of service to investors. Franklin & Templeton Worldwide form the more than $110 billion Franklin Templeton Group, a global alliance of over 100 mutual funds and investment products, including U.S. government securities funds. Digital, an information technology company putting imagination to work. And by the financial support of viewers like you. For a transcript of this program, please send $4 check or money order to NBR Transcripts, WPBT, P.O. Box 2, Miami, Florida 33261-0002. Please include the date of the broadcast.
You'd stop at nothing to get me and the children out of this cottage. Not so long ago, they used to ban people like you.
Next on Mystery, Adam Dalgleish searches for clues linking nuclear sabotage to murder.
The Whistler has killed again. I found the body.
Didn't the police ask you to keep all this confidential?
P.D. James's Devices and Desires on Mystery.
Tonight at 9 on WETA.
We depend on independent truckers. Move cargo by ship. And expect delivery right away over the railway. Why do we go to great lengths to deliver the goods? Watch Coming and Going.
Friday night at 9 on WETA.
Let's go! 29 days to the end of the fiscal year. 29 days for you to financially support WETA. WETA brings you diverse and unique programming, the kind you won't find elsewhere. Programs that educate the young, programs that make you think, quality series that continue throughout the year, specials that capture your interests, and events that captivate the nation. This is your public television station. This is WETA. A fighter pilot's story. Coming and Going. Victory at Sea. D-Day specials. And the Civil War. Special programs this month. Programs chosen for your special interests. Made possible with your financial help. WETA depends on the continued financial support of all our viewers to bring you quality television all year long. Take a moment to consider the benefits of WETA to you and your family. We invite you to join us. Become a member of WETA. Call 1-800-792-2626 right now.
It was World War II. The Germans were holding their ground, and in the skies above flew thousands of Allied planes with thousands of men and thousands of stories. This is one man's story, a fighter pilot's story.
Friday night at 10 on WETA. Stay tuned to Stereo 26 in Washington, D.C., broadcasting to your community in suburban Maryland, Virginia, and the District. Local broadcast of the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour is made possible in part by WETA members and Anheuser-Busch, committed to respect for the environment today for a world we can live with tomorrow. That's our pledge and promise.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Warner in Washington.
And I'm Robert McNeil in New York. After the news summary tonight, we discuss the rising tension over North Korea's nuclear program and how tough the United States should get. Betty Ann Bowser reports on the debate over how to educate children with special needs. And from Normandy, Tom Bearden explores France's bittersweet memories of World War II.
Major funding for the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company, ADM, supermarket to the world. And by New York Life, yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. And by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
An international confrontation with North Korea over nuclear inspections appeared closer today. Aides traveling with President Clinton in Rome said the U.S. will seek United Nations sanctions against North Korea. The move was triggered by today's report from UN nuclear monitors. The report said the North Koreans have now made it impossible to tell whether nuclear fuel has been diverted for weapons use. During a press conference in Rome, President Clinton said the North Koreans have triggered this, not the United States or anyone else. He said the U.S. and the world community had tried to work with North Korea for 5 years to resolve the issue. In Moscow, Russian President Boris Yeltsin proposed an international conference to mediate the dispute. But at a news conference with South Korea's president, Yeltsin said he would consider sanctions as a last resort. We'll have more on the story right after the news summary. Robin?
During his Rome visit, President Clinton had a private meeting at the Vatican with Pope John Paul. Afterwards, Mr. Clinton said they discussed such issues as North Korea, Bosnia, and events in the Islamic world. They also discussed birth control and abortion, topics on which Mr. Clinton said they had genuine disagreements.
We talked about the upcoming conference in Cairo on world population problems, about where we agreed and where we didn't, and how we could come together on a policy that would promote responsible growth of the world's population and still reaffirm our common commitment to the central role of the family in every society.
Mr. Clinton is on an 8-day European trip leading up to next Monday's commemoration of the 50th anniversary of D-Day. This afternoon, in a speech in front of Rome City Hall, he recalled the liberation of Rome on June 4th, 1944. Tomorrow, he visits a cemetery at Nettuno Beach, where U.S. soldiers killed in the Sicily to Rome campaign are buried.
Israeli jets bombed a Shiite guerrilla base in eastern Lebanon today. At least 26 people were reported killed in the raid at the camp, which Israel claimed was a training base for terrorists. After the attack, the guerrillas retaliated by firing at least 25 rockets into northern Israel. There were no reports of injuries. There were conflicting reports today about the health of PLO chairman Yasser Arafat. Early reports said he was suffering chest pains caused by angina, a primary symptom of coronary artery disease. A PLO official in Tunis said Arafat became ill yesterday. Later in the day, however, a spokesman said Arafat had only been suffering from the flu. The PLO leader was hospitalized twice last month after he complained of exhaustion.
The Red Cross today appealed for more than $70 million to feed hundreds of thousands of refugees from Rwanda. That would triple the Red Cross's current budget for the Central African country. Meanwhile, thousands of Rwandans continue to seek refuge from the tribal war in makeshift camps. But as Mark Austin of Independent Television News reports, many of them are still in danger.
Escaping the bloodletting that's engulfed this country, millions of people inside Rwanda are on the move. As gunfire echoes in the hills, these are Hutu people running from the advance of the Tutsi rebel army. But these are the real faces of fear in Rwanda, Tutsi civilians facing systematic massacre. They're trapped in a grim camp 30 miles from the capital, Kigali. 20,000 of them. If they try to leave, they'll almost certainly be massacred by Hutu gangs. And even as they stay, they're apparently being murdered at the rate of 10 or 15 every night. Red Cross officials at the camp can only watch the butchery.
Anybody can walk into these camps and start to kill. And we just stand here and there's nothing we can do. And they do it. Everybody who wants to get into the camp with machete, with clubs, with machine guns, they kill, they move out, and they move away. Nobody can do anything.
And you can't stop it yourselves, obviously?
Of course not. If we start to stop, our life is personally in danger, and it doesn't help anything.
This camp is the biggest concentration of Tutsis left in Hutu-controlled Rwanda. The fear is that when the army leaves here, these people too will be massacred before the rebels arrive. The Rwandan army and Hutu militias nearby seem unwilling or unable to stop the killings. This is a country where almost the entire population is fleeing, has fled, or is dead.
Police in China have arrested a leading labor activist and have stepped up surveillance of other dissidents. 27-year-old Wang Zhongqiu was taken into custody last week, according to a friend. Wang is a law student at Beijing University and a leading advocate of workers' rights. Police also briefly detained 6 Christians who were worshiping outside of government-sanctioned churches. The detentions coincided with the 5th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square crackdown.
There was more evidence today that the economy may be cooling down. The Commerce Department reported the index of leading indicators held steady in April after a strong gain in March. The index foreshadows economic activity over the next several months. It was also reported today that factory orders dipped 0.1% in April after rising more than 1% in March. A separate report released today says that the percentage of low-wage earners in the American workforce is increasing. The report, issued jointly by the Commerce and Labor Departments, found a two-tier wage structure in the U.S. An ever-growing number of American workers in the bottom tier are paid markedly less than comparable workers in other advanced countries, the report found. America's high-wage workers, on the other hand, earn more than their foreign counterparts.
That's our news summary tonight. Now it's on to the Korean threat, special education needs, and French memories of World War II.
Our lead tonight is the nuclear showdown between the United States and North Korea. Today, the Clinton administration said it will seek United Nations sanctions against North Korea for defying international inspection of its nuclear program. North Korea has said it would regard sanctions as an act of war. Some members of Congress have already responded harshly to North Korea's actions and rhetoric.
The North Koreans are playing brinksmanship. This is a historical pattern, but playing this game has very dangerous consequences. And one of the consequences of their statements about threatening war if sanctions are imposed by the United Nations is going to be, have to be a strengthening of our defensive capabilities in North Korea as we move forward to the UN.
The Clinton administration believes that North Korea has already produced 1 or 2 nuclear weapons, but has been trying to verify that for sure. North Korea has insisted its nuclear program is peaceful, but has resisted international efforts to inspect those facilities. The stalemate reached a crisis this weekend when North Korea speeded up its removal of spent fuel rods from a suspect reactor out of sight of inspectors. The result is that the International Atomic Energy Agency now has lost its ability to determine if any of that nuclear fuel was diverted for weapons use. We take up the story now with 3 people. Don Oberdorfer is an author and former Washington Post correspondent who has recently been in South Korea. Tony Namkung is a consultant on Asian affairs and director of the East Asian Studies program at Seton Hall University. He is in frequent contact with the North Koreans. And Larry Eric Eagleburger was Secretary of State in the Bush administration. He joins us from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Mr. Eagleburger, let me start with you. Is this the right move by the Clinton administration to move now for economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations?
You bet your life. It should have been done some weeks or months ago, but better late than never. This is an issue that we simply cannot tolerate to proceed as it's now going on.
Mr. Namkung, how do you feel about it? Is this the right move?
This is exactly the wrong move to take at this time. This is the time to move rapidly towards a 3rd round of high-level talks between the North Koreans and the United States.
Well, Mr. Namkung, didn't the United States offer these high-level talks a couple of weeks ago, and the North Koreans, I think, said they wanted to first finish their work on this reactor?
North Korea's current beef, as I understand it, is not so much with Washington as it is with Vienna, with the International Atomic Energy Agency, known otherwise as the IAEA. What we've seen last week, apparently, is a repetition of a series of events that took place in early February of 1993 on the eve of North Korea's withdrawal from the NPT. And that was a back-to-back sequence of events that began on the 8th of February when the IAEA inspectors apparently pledged to the North Koreans that they would take the North Korean methods of sampling the data and to determine how much plutonium might have been produced back in 1989, 1990, to Vienna for further analysis and sampling, only to turn around within the space of 24 hours and issue a call for special inspections of 2 waste disposal sites, which the North Koreans call military sites. What we've seen last week is precisely the same sequence of events happening. The IAEA inspectors on the ground having pledged to take the North Korean method of ensuring that the fuel rods that are being extracted now are available for later inspections and subjecting them to further analysis in Vienna, only to have the Secretariat in Vienna issue a call for sanctions and for tough actions before the team even reached its home base.
Well, Mr. Eagleburger, what about that analysis that in fact there was some wiggle room here and that the North Koreans were offering something?
The only wiggle room we have had over the last months is that we sit back and let the North Koreans play games with us. They have no intention of letting the IAEA do the sort of inspection that would decide whether they do or do not have nuclear weapons. It is clear to anybody with eyes in his head that they intend to build, if they have not already built, nuclear weapons. They are playing games with us, and I'm through listening to excuses for the North Koreans. Any regime that blows up half of the South Korean cabinet a decade ago, blows up a jumbo jet with a lot of South Koreans in it, and does what it did to the Pueblo, et cetera, is not a regime that is to be trusted on anything.
Well, Mr. Oberdorfer, you just returned from the Korean Peninsula. How do you see it? Do you think this was sufficient provocation for the U.S. to do this, and do you think it's going to work?
I have a great sense of tragedy about it and a sense of foreboding. For now 2.5 years, since Mr. Eagleburger's time in government, the United States has been saying to the North Koreans, there are two roads here. You can either go down the road toward an inspection regime and putting your nuclear program under controls, or you can go down the road toward an greater international isolation, build-up of tension, and so forth. I think what we have seen in the past day or two, maybe you could say week, that road has been turned. And we are going down the road now toward much higher tension with the North Koreans, toward a problem. You already have a hair-trigger situation on the Korean Peninsula with major, massive forces on both sides of the lines. It's going to be much more tense. I don't know anybody who is informed, including most of the officials of the U.S. government, who thinks that putting on sanctions is going to accomplish its goal. That is, the goal of turning the North Korean policy around. It is a way of punishing them. Maybe there's no alternative to doing that at this particular stage. It's hard to see. But what has been done by going for sanctions, it really is the effective end, I'm afraid, of the negotiating route. So we're going to be in a much more difficult, delicate, tense, and dangerous situation on the Korean Peninsula.
Mr. Namkung, do you agree that this now means really the end of the negotiating route as far as the North Koreans are going to see it?
Oh, no, by no means. I think that the North Korean Foreign Ministry in the last 24 hours, for example, has dropped a hint, according to their releases, that the pace of removal of the fuel rods was speeded up at one point, but suggesting that perhaps that process can be slowed down.
No, what I'm driving at here is what impact do you think now the U.S. move toward getting sanctions at the UN is going to have on North Korea on this nuclear issue?
Well, I believe that they have made a tactical error at this particular stage of the negotiations. I don't think that they understood that the reaction would be as powerful and as strong as it has been this past week, and I think that they will take corresponding measures. That's just my private view.
But do you think they will essentially cave in to the IAEA's demands now?
No, I think that some analysis of their method and the IAEA's method has to be done at this stage by someone, leading to some sort of a settlement over how the fuel rods can be preserved for subsequent future analysis.
Yes, Mr. Eagleburger, go ahead.
I wanted to say, I think the points that Don Oberdorfer has made are absolutely correct. Much as I think we must do everything we can to stop this process, I have to admit it is a very unpleasant thing we're looking at. And I don't deny that for one moment. I think, and one of the things that I object to with regard to this administration is it has not spent the time over the last months telling the American people how serious this problem is. And I imagine a lot of people are now going to be very surprised. But if you look at what the world will be like 5 or 6 years from now, if we do not stop this process in North Korea, it ought to scare the pants off everybody. This is the beginning of the end of controlling the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons in particular, if we don't stop this thing. And beyond that, you have to expect if they build a nuclear weapon, and they may already have one, the Japanese will be driven to do it themselves at some point. We are in the beginnings of a nuclear arms race in the Pacific that ought to scare us to death. They will be selling these things to the Iraqis and to the Iranians and to the Libyans, and boy, are we going to be in trouble. And that's the reason we have to be so serious now. But Don is correct. We are on the edge of a very explosive situation, and I don't deny it. And the North Koreans may go to war over this, which leads me to say, before anything else, that we should have beefed up our forces in South Korea already, and I don't think we have. But it is a very nasty situation. I don't deny it. It is the kind of foreign policy problem that if you don't deal with the tough situation now, you will have a much worse one some years down the road.
But very briefly, do you agree also with Don Oberdorfer's rather pessimistic assessment that, in fact, economic sanctions won't turn North Korea around?
I'm not quite so pessimistic. I think Don is probably right, and certainly they won't if the Russians and the Chinese don't agree, which leads me back to a certain irritation over having beaten the Chinese around the ears for the last 6 months on other issues when we need them so badly on this one. If you could close down the North Korean economy, and particularly petroleum, and that comes from China mostly, it might make a difference, but it might also lead them to go to war. I can't deny that.
Well, Mr. Oberdorfer, what do you think if the North Koreans don't respond to these economic sanctions, then what is the next step? Because, in fact, their nuclear program, the U.S. believes, is underway even as we speak, correct?
Well, the probable next step is they will withdraw completely from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which will eliminate a good deal of the legal basis for our pressing them to accept inspectors. There will be no more inspectors in North Korea from the international agencies. The end that we have in view, which is controlling and perhaps containing, as much as a lot of people don't like that word, the nuclear program of North Korea, will not be advanced by this, unfortunately. I think there's something that's very important to understand that is not coming through in the news stories, or at least not the ones that I've read recently. The North Koreans are making a big distinction in their actions, not their words necessarily, between the past, what they have done in the past to divert nuclear materials, which the IAEA suspects that they have done.
And which is the evidence that has been
The evidence
removed.
that is being destroyed
Yes.
is the evidence of what they have done before. At the same time, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Commission agency, told me just this morning they are being very forthcoming about the present and the future. They are keeping these rods under their surveillance, at least for the time being, of the international agencies. So the future diversions are not in the cards, at least as long as they continue this regime. The problem is that they have so lost the confidence of the various international actors by their various tactics and strategies that nobody is willing to accept their word that they will continue to keep these rods under international surveillance. And if there are sanctions, I think it's very predictable. They will step out of the regime completely. There will be no more inspectors there. And then this fuel becomes very liable for whatever they want to do with it.
Mr. Namkung, do you agree with Mr. Oberdorfer's analysis that the North Koreans are trying to keep this distinction, and if so, why?
Well, by all means, and I'm glad you've asked that question, because I think the overriding foreign policy objective of the North Koreans throughout this entire crisis has been normalization of relations with the United States, preceded by a peace treaty. Their purpose is to forge a friendly relationship with the U.S., not to go to war. And they have insisted all along that their suspension of their withdrawal from the NPT gives them a special status within the NPT that is neither in nor out. That is obviously not satisfactory to the international community, but they have maintained that consistently from the very beginning. The diversion of materials that has taken place is now 4 years old, and the North Koreans have not diverted any fissile material for the production of nuclear weapons for at least 4 years now. And as Don has just pointed out, they have been religious in ensuring the international community that there is no current activity going on, and there will be no future activity going on in this area. I would therefore agree with Don that they are trying to find a solution out of this mess.
Well, Mr. Eagleburger, do you agree then that there is still something worth preserving here in a relationship, in this negotiation with North Korea?
Well, with all respect to both of the gentlemen, I've never heard so much baloney in my life. What the North Koreans are out to get is not a friendly relationship with the United States, for Pete's sake. They're out to build a nuclear arsenal so that they can do whatever they like with it and use it to blackmail the neighborhood. Secondly, Don argues If we go ahead with the sanctions, we lose the NPT, and then we won't get any inspections. But when we had the NPT, they wouldn't let us inspect. So there's a little bit of confusion in my mind here, beyond which, if you believe that the North Koreans, because they say they will do this in the future, mean it, then I've got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
Okay, so then how long should the United States, let's say it succeeds in getting sanctions at the UN, which is a separate issue, then how long should the U.S. wait to see sanctions work before considering some other step?
I can't answer that, Margaret, because I don't know whether the sanctions will work. Don raised a perfectly good question. They may not. If they do, we will see if they really squeeze the economy, which is already in a terrible mess, then we may begin to see some reason come to the North Korean mind. I think it's highly unlikely, but possible. If not, we go on as long as we can. But I must say to you, and Senator McCain of Arizona is the only one who's had the courage to say it, this is one, if in the end it is necessary to use force, we ought to use force, because we simply cannot tolerate this process to continue. Certainly we ought to be prepared to use force if the North Koreans carry out their threat and try to invade South Korea. And I don't care whether this is met happily by anybody or not, because if we fail now, and this happens, I want to be around 5 or 10 years from now when we have to clean up the mess at much greater cost than if we try to take care of it now, unpleasant and nasty and awful as it may be.
Yes, please
say one thing about, I hate to disagree with Mr. Eagleburger.
Come on, Oberdorfer, you've disagreed with me for 20 years.
Well, it's true, time to time. But it's not true, really, that while we negotiated, they did not let the inspectors in. They did let the inspectors in.
Yeah,
the inspectors
Don,
had
but
6
off and
inspections
on,
there,
here and
right
there.
now.
All right, let me close just by asking you one question. Senator McCain did call today for military action to take out some of these reactors and suspect sites. Is that practically feasible? Is that something that militarily could be done without damage to South Korea?
I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that if you attacked the reactor or the place where the fuel rods are, you would spread radiation all over Northeast Asia. Not to South Korea, but to China and other countries, and possibly even to Japan.
There are ways, I'm told, to do it that wouldn't do that, but they're chancy. I think Don is right. It's at least a danger.
Well, on that horrifying note, we'll have to end this. Thank you both very much, all three of you. Robin?
Still ahead on the NewsHour, a debate about special education and painful memories in France.